Hi, and welcome to Rec Chat, where students and professionals talk about all things in collegiate recreation. I am your host. My name is Paul Joseph. I am from the University of Wisconsin Madison, where I am currently the coordinator of club and community programs. Thank you today for joining us either live or via our archived Twitter or YouTube channel. Joining me behind the scenes is our Rec Chat team. So I'm here going to introduce Aaron Sanders.
Hello, everybody. My name is Erin Sanders. I use she, her pronouns, and I am at excuse me, Appalachian State University. I currently work with our member services and communications initiatives. Welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. So the title of our show today is Leaving the Campus Recreation Field. We are excited to have this group of well thought of professionals who are joining with us today. For those of you who are following on Twitter, we'll be asking questions using the @RecChat handle regarding the group that we have here today. So please feel free to participate. So before we introduce our panelists, we want to share our gratitude with our friends at Nurse HQ for all their support. If you haven't already, follow them on Twitter at Nurse Alive. Did you know that RecChat is on Instagram? Be sure to follow us also at RecChat. You can see that below on the ticker. So we're going to introduce our panelists right now. So without further ado, I'll let our panelists do the talking. So please introduce yourself by name, position, institution, or where you're currently working at. And what is your favorite season and why? That is our Connect concept question.
All right, I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Ethan Engel, and I am currently with the City of Livonia Parks and Recreation, serving as their athletics coordinator. Kind of my quick path, I was mainly based in intramurals through undergrad. I did an internship at the University of Michigan in that same field, got my master's degree from the University of Tennessee as an intramural sports GA. My first and only professional job in collegiate recreation was at Bowling Green State University, where I had intramurals, sport clubs, kids camps, and then I ended up taking over the facility I was in as well. So that was kind of my path before I left collegiate rec. My favorite season, I would have to say, is fall. You get some great leaves up here in the state of Michigan, and it's phenomenal. It's still nice enough where you can wear, light clothing or shorts to get out and be active and enjoy Mother Nature, but not quite, super hot where you're in the dead heat of winter, or dead heat of summer, excuse me, where you're going to start sweating as soon as you step outdoors. So that would be my favorite season and why.
Thank you.
I'll go next. I'm Sarah DeStefano. Currently, I am based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm at the Marquette University Law School as their Assistant Director of Student Affairs. My background, similar to Ethan, I'm a Midwestern girl, born and bred. I came up through the sport club route as an undergrad at the University of Michigan. I did my graduate assistantship at Oakland University in Michigan as well, in the intramurals clubs area. And then my first and only professional position was at Florida Gulf Coast University as a competitive sports coordinator down there. Hurricane Irma came through and I noped out of that. But actually my partner wanted to come back to the Midwest, and that's what landed us in Milwaukee and the position that I'm in now. And my favorite season is also going to be fall. Florida was a lot of fun for a few years, but man, I actually miss the cold. So fall is my favorite time of year. It's the best time, especially here in the Midwest.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm Mark Iturriaga. I'm Canadian, so I'm going to start off that winter and fall are not my favorite. It's always cold here. Pronouns he, his, him. I'm currently the executive director of the Mohawk Student Association. We are a separate entity from the Mohawk College, so we are different legal entities as a student government and a student union. Started off as an intramural coordinator. One of the things is I've worked in multiple student affairs positions before I got to rec. Canada has a different system with regards to we don't have GAs and all that. So started off in the intramurals, worked at several institutions as an associate director. Athletics and rec in Canada are together. That's a whole other ball game that led to some of my changes. And I'm also the founder and lead consultant for Bonobo Consulting, where I work with a lot of sometimes campus rec organizations on fostering belonging in sport. And so my favorite is summer. I like, summer is perfect in Ontario. It's a beautiful, so, people sometimes leave Ontario in the summer. I don't know why. It's gorgeous. It's not too hot, not too cold. Get to go on the rivers, camping, all that stuff is wonderful.
Thank you, Mark.
Y'all are making me real jealous as we enter a Texas summer. So check in with me here soon. Hi, everybody. My name is Sibby Barton. I am a professor here at Texas Tech University. In addition to that, I am also the director of esports events and outreach. So within the College of Media and Communication where I work, there is a gaming lab right downstairs that I oversee the outreach and events that happen in that space. So my recreation career began when I was on the women's rugby club at Texas Tech University. So I'm in the same building that I went to undergrad in. It's all full circle. And then from there, I went to grad school at Western Kentucky, focusing on the sport club side. And my first job out of grad school was at Penn State University, was there for a couple of years, shifting into more of a competitive sports model. And then went to the University of Michigan, which is what a connection with all of us here, or nearby neighbors. And I was there for the last 4.5 years. So just started this position at Texas Tech back in January.
Cool. Do you have a favorite season?
Yeah, I do. Summers in Michigan, winters in Texas.
Completely understandable. Thank you, Sibby. All right. So let's begin with our first question, which is, when you were in the field, what was your favorite part?
I'll jump in. I think I spoke when we talked earlier with probably for most of us, for me anyways, and again, you can see the gray hairs. I've been around for a while. It's always and still continues to be the students. I didn't start off with a rec. I worked recreation as a referee and coordinator as a student level undergrad, which is the process in Canada. Never thought I would be into rec. My whole purpose was always about student leadership, student development, and sport and rec and campus rec particularly allowed for that. So I actually started off as an international student coordinator, then worked in Res Life, and then came back to it as an intramural coordinator. And again, didn't think I was going to be there long, but what kept me there was I was always engaged with students. And whatever position I had, even as I went up in leadership to the director roles, it was always about the students. I really could care less about the system of sport and rec. It was all about the outcome of sport and rec, and it's particularly campus rec, of that building connection, that sense of belonging, that health and well-being, that impact we had with students. That's what it was always about for me.
I think almost on the flip side of that is the people that I got to work with, or my peers. One of my favorite things of NERSA of all time has always been NERSA soccer, and being able to meet new people at those events and collaborate to execute one of the best soccer tournaments in the nation. It was cool to focus on work things, but it's even cooler to have friends outside of the work itself, and people that I continuously talk to on a daily basis is because I met them through some event or conference, or just simply existing in the same field as somebody else within NERSA. So students might get a second place to that for me.
Yeah, I'll echo Sibby on that. It was definitely the people. And I like almost feel that way now in my new job. I was like, I think almost like working at FGCU, I felt like our team was so good that I was like, man, I feel like I just ruined working anywhere else. Or like, I was like, oh, other workplaces aren't like this. Okay, got it now. But honestly, like the NERSA family is still really supportive. And so I don't think I would have been able to make my transition out of it if it weren't for my colleagues and friends within NERSA and in Campus Rec.
I'm going to bounce off Mark real quick with the students. My favorite part was watching those students get those big moments, whether it was getting a GAA for Campus Rec, getting into law school, whatever that is, and knowing the role they played with our department, whether it was a facility manager role, supervisor, whatever that is, help them get there and giving them that rah-rah, that huge hug, whatever that was. That was my favorite moment for the students because I played a part in getting them to where they want to go.
And I'll jump in to add to Sarah as well, and Sibi, that idea of NERSA and the colleagues here. You know, there's connections here that we can trace. And unfortunately, I didn't get involved in NERSA, though I've been a member for over 20 years, until the later half of my career. And like Sarah, you said, like I wouldn't be where I am today without those family, those friends out there that I saw limited, but every time it was such an important engagement that, yeah, I owe everything to those. And that's why I'm still involved in NERSA in any way I can, though I have wellness as part of what we do. I don't have sport and rec. I could probably never be involved, but I convinced them to say, no, this is important because we are talking about student wellness, and the learnings I still get from everyone here is continually gives back to my professional development, regardless whether it's sport and rec related or not.
Thank you, everybody. Our next question is the big one. What made you all decide to leave campus recreation? We'll start with Sibi.
Great, thanks. That's how you can tell that Paul's a friend outside of work. Yeah, I think a lot of the questions that we are going to go through today are going to be challenging. So just in the vein of the theme from me is trying to be authentic while hoping everybody who's listening to this is curious about our experiences. And it doesn't mean that it's what we think everybody goes through. So some of the reasons for me why I left campus recreation, I think it really started to be a thought was at the beginning of the pandemic, just really life in general, which I'm sure we'll talk about several times here. But that was also around the time that I started going to therapy. And what that did, for better or for worse, was really starting to challenge what I was spending my time on and what was making me happy. And through that, I was able to identify these three things to be the big contributing factors for leaving campus rec. The first one is the lack of opportunities to move up. Unless you want to move 5,000 different places all around the country, it's not likely that you're going to move up in the position that you're in now or at the institution that you're in now within the rec program. So starting to see that, and then also a lot of institutions cutting GA grad assistantships for whatever reason. I think it really just started to bottleneck, and we could see some of the results of that. And then second reason, and this is just overall, again, this isn't just exclusive to my previous work environments, but I think what we saw was during the pandemic, a huge support for our students and for us to be creative in how we design programming so that people could do it from afar or whatever the case may be. But there was a lot of support for our students, and I didn't really feel like we got support as staff of having to adapt and having to be really creative while everything that's going on in the world, like the shift in technology, global disease, political movements, civil unrest, like the list goes on. And it didn't feel like we had a time for the staff to like take a beat to. And then I think both of those really lead into my third reason is burnout. I didn't really know what it was until it was too late. And I think unfortunately that's where a lot of people are when they get to that point. But yeah, I was volunteering at so many different events for NERSA, and that felt like the only way to move up or to be a better candidate for a job in the future is like, how many things can I volunteer for? But in reality, for me, it didn't work out that way. The return on investment wasn't there. So I'm a lot of free labor to continue to work. in the minutes that should be just spared for me, it led to a significant burnout with volunteering and kind of maybe a little resentful with work. So that was a really difficult time for me to try and navigate and just name the feelings. And then also to realize where I'm spending my resources and is it worth it? And I found a lot of the time that it wasn't. Good luck, everybody else.
I can go next. So the reason I left, like I mentioned earlier, is that if you have family, if you've got a partner or kids or spouse, like sometimes you're location bound. And so my partner had made the move down to Florida for me. So that was the deal with us, is the next one was for him. And so that's how we ended, at least in Milwaukee. And I had the privilege or luck to actually have a choice. I had an opportunity to, hey, it was a lateral move. I could be a competitive sports coordinator up here. I was going to get paid about the same, or I could do something new at a different school and or in a different area. And then at that point, it came down to the money. It was, I could do the same for about the same, or for like over 15K more, I could do this other thing. And I just moved to a new city. My partner was about to start grad school. Like, it was kind of a no-brainer. And I've worked with budgets. I know there's no wiggle room, that they can't keep us. Hey, you've created this very educated staff, and you know, I know you could get stuck in a pay band and you wouldn't be able to move up. So that was kind of the opportunity of like, all right, I'm going to take it. And it was hard. It was like, I still want to be in this, but I mean, the money was worth it, and it let us do a lot more things. On the other side, like when Sibby said burnout, I didn't realize I was burnt out until I left. And I was like, wait a second, you asked me to do all of this stuff, and I didn't realize that didn't have those expectations of me to join every committee on campus and all of that kind of thing. And it was like, oh, so this is what it feels to work a 9 to 5, and working late is 6:37 once or twice a month. And so it was hard, but not really when it came down to the money piece of it.
I'll go after Sarah because it's kind of a similar part for me. My wife was, because you've got Bowling Green, Ohio is where I was at, and we were living in the Toledo suburbs. I have to say that as Sibby went to Western Kentucky and Bowling Green, Kentucky. So I wanted to clarify that I was in the Ohio location of Bowling Green. And my wife, being a nurse, she had moved now twice for me down to Tennessee and then up into Ohio, but her license, she was still licensed for Michigan. So she was working in Ann Arbor. And so for me, it was a work-life balance call because she was still on nights. And there would be 5-6 days where we would go without seeing each other because she had an hour drive one way to get into work. And regardless of my schedule, I was expected to be back in the office between 8:30, 9 o'clock the next day. That was a huge thing for me. We just didn't see anybody, didn't see each other. And I would come home to an empty apartment, and there would be times where I didn't have a lot of the, not from my supervisor, but from a top-down perspective to use the resources and tools I had gained through my experience to put on good programs. And I would literally sometimes be shaking of like out of anxiety, waiting for a phone call from my staff, knowing something was going to go wrong and they were going to call me. I never felt like I could turn off just based on that role. And so I was hitting burnout, and I realized it. Like I was with Sibby, I started seeing a therapist during that time. And she helped me work through some of that stuff. And then the other part that caused me to leave, similar to Sarah, was the pay. When I started at BGSU, they offered me a 10-month contract, but I had to work all 12 months of the year. I was essentially a faculty contract. So I'd have to take unpaid days. I rarely worked a Friday. I got so good at it, I had my out of office memorized, and it got quite lengthy at a certain point. And they brought me in going, hey, we feel you can, bump this up. You get the revenue created, which I did do. And I still didn't get promoted up to a full-time contract. The only time that happened was when our facility manager left. And then I took on that role, and I wasn't even compensated for taking on an entire other facility. It was just, oh, this is what your contract is. Here you go. So you combine the burnout and the pay is kind of similar to Sarah. I was looking to have a little more work-life balance, see my wife at that time, and we moved up, and she had moved twice for me. My new job immediately gave me a 10 to 15 grand raise, like no questions asked. And I'm still doing very similar things and enjoying what I do. So those are the two biggest things that got it for me, to kind of echo off of Sibby and Sarah, as they said, with the burnout and the pay. It was there.
I would share that. Mine's completely different. Never was it about burnout. I'm lucky. Canadian system is different. Good or bad, there's only like 4 schools in all of Canada anyway. So Erie, Pennsylvania probably has more institutions. No, but to be serious, for me, we had the opportunity. We had the work-life balance. We were paid well. The challenge came from me, and one of the future questions is the actual institution itself and the value they placed on the work that we did, and it was challenging to see institutional values, strat plans being presented, yet there was a disconnect to the actual actions that were happening throughout, and doing all that work to support. Hey, look, we're supporting student wellness. We're doing all these things, and being brushed aside for other initiatives, politicalness, all these pieces that didn't seem to jive with institutional missions, or what I felt we were there for the students. And the higher up you get, the more behind the curtains you see, and the more I don't want to say, not wrongdoings, but really pieces that felt wrong, that felt sketchy, that felt, if people knew about this, what would they say? And the more I saw it, the more that I got covered up, the more that, people go, oh, well, that's just the way it is. I'm a disruptor. I don't settle with that's the way it is. Sometimes that got me in trouble, but eventually it led to, I'm not cut out for working at an institution. And so started looking at what else could that be? And that's actually, I took a bit of a break. My work on belonging came from that. I took a year to really connect with anyone and everyone I could. NERSA played a huge role in that. Like Sibby helped me with a webinar series. I just want to explore these things and let's just see what's going on. And it really helped me think, oh, cool, maybe there's something else here. Then the pandemic hit, and that kind of put a kibosh to a lot of that. But again, I still investigated, but there was that piece of, because my work in consulting really relied heavily on the institutions having money to be able to utilize my services, which wasn't the case as they were rebuilding. That's what led me to saying, okay. And in fact, when I applied to the executive director for the Student Association, not to say I did it on a lark, but it was like, okay, I could get back involved with students, not on the institution side. Worked virtually for 9 months. And it got me hooked because, again, I feel like we're at a position where I can support students, and we control the narrative of what our work culture is, of what our values are, and how we work together in collaboration with the college. But, we're not bound to those institutional directives, the politics there. I mean, we work together. We always have to collaborate, but it's nice to be away from that institutional I don't know if it's jailing, it feels like, where you're trapped. You feel trapped in the system of higher ed institutions.
Well, thank you, everybody. I knew that was there were a lot of thoughts behind that question. So our next question, what does your new role provide that being in Campus Rec did not? And we can start with Sarah.
The biggest one is more free time. I actually have, for us being health and wellness people, we do a really poor job of practicing what we preach. I have more time now for other hobbies, including working out, than I did when my office was actually in our fitness center. So like that was one of the things of like, oh, I actually have more time for hobbies and for things that I want to do outside of that, whether that's spending time with my partner, exploring a new city, gardening, all that kind of thing. The other thing too is just the consistent schedule. Like I know everyone like slams on the 9 to 5, but man, it's really nice. It's nice to have weekends and nights free. I'm not, hey, I have a training at like 11 p.m. and then I got to be up the next morning in the office to answer emails, or again, be on call for clubs over the weekend and that kind of thing. And then also just like feeling valued at work too. Like my supervisor's really great. Everyone's like really flexible if you got to take time off, or again, just I've been here for almost 5 years now. Like I got a title bump. I've been getting cost of living, but also a little bit nicer promotional pay increases, which keep me happy. And so that has been, I think, some of the things that I've enjoyed in my new role that I didn't necessarily get in Campus Rec.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, like similar things. I'm looking at my responses that I typed up of the questions that y'all gave, and it's pretty much the opposite of what I said why I left campus recreation. So lots of opportunities for promotional things or tenure and things like that. And for the things that I am putting effort towards, I see the return on investment, more money, like compensation or time. And I know that recreation, it varies on departments and things like that, where you do see, okay, if you worked late the night before for officials training, come in at a half day tomorrow. While that's great, I think Sarah brought up a good point of like, that also limits you of what you can do outside of work, right? Like if you're gonna play on an intramural team and you're working that night, you ain't going. So it adds up. So I echo a lot what Sarah said in the way of just how time is so valuable and where that's going, and how I have more time to do that kind of stuff too.
Cool. Our next question: if the opportunity arises, would you ever go back? Why or why not? And we'll go with Ethan this time.
I've thought about this multiple times, because I've had a couple people reach out just through connections I know across the state of Michigan here, and I'm not looking to return. Part of that is that work-life balance of being on call. Like I'm in a role right now very similar to an intramural coordinator or an assistant director. Like I do athletics, I do adult leagues. I don't have all the additional student officials trainings and that kind of stuff. So I have my grind times, but they're not as long. I have the flexibility as well, and I'm in a good spot where I could come in, I could flex time off, I could move my schedule around. So Sarah, I would love the 9 to 5, but that's just, I'm still okay with that off hours, but I have that flexibility back and forth and have that understanding. And I feel like in higher ed, you have to get very specific and hope you get the right supervisor, right department to have that. I didn't have that at BGSU, and I really struggled with that, where I constantly had to be on and be ready to answer questions and show up the next day and be the professional there. And the other part you have that higher ed will struggle with is the pay. I think it's one that, especially at that coordinator entry level after 2 years of grad school, you show up and you're getting 30 to 40,000 and you're lucky and you're expected to pull some of those crazy hours. My role at Livonia allowed me to quick hop up and make equal, if not more, than what my colleagues in the state were for doing less work than them. So for me, I love the colleagues in the field, and I wouldn't be where I am today without some of my connections within NERSA, but I'm not looking to go back because I have that work-life balance. I've got a good thing going, and that's a struggle for me to try and dive back into that, in addition to all the politics that Mark kind of touched on earlier.
I'll add, if someone handed me the keys to the center and said, we want you to run a values-based rec center and programming, and we trust you and your team to achieve the outcomes that are laid out for you and the resources you are required to do that, absolutely. Because then you would say, here's why my staff get paid properly. Here's why we don't ask people to work overtime, because our values are about health and well-being. That goes back to the staff, all the pieces that everyone has talked about. But then it comes back to why not? Because I don't trust any institution to actually follow suit on that. And one of the things I think I've learned, it's not about the people, for the most part, in the institutions. It's the system of the institution that does not reward innovation, does not reward this idea of being values-based. They talk about it, but oftentimes these are checklists. And the amount of people that come and go in an institution is astounding. So without any sustainability, I trust that even if that happens for the first year, because you do have that great leader, Ethan, that you're talking about, we're going to do that. Oh, now they're gone. Someone else came in and they take the keys back, right? So that's the piece where, realistic, fantastically, yes. In a perfect world, realistically, I don't think so.
Yeah, unless there were changes, right? Like if the pay and the what you're asking and the workload matched, then yes, I would try. Maybe I would try, but right now I know it doesn't match, and that's not something I think I would look at, especially in my future.
All right. We're going to move on to our next question, which is, what are the aspects of higher education that you believe need to be reformed? I'll go with Mark this time.
Well, and I think I already shared that. Again, it's the system of higher education. When we think about what are the outcomes, right? There's a huge component of academics and academic success that obviously is there and often is at odds with our student affairs, partners, because like, well, yes, you help them in their school, but school is the most important part. And I don't necessarily argue that. But when we think of the whole student experience, the holistic approach, understanding the value that all these student affairs, Campus Rec included, have on that student experience and that student success, the research is there. Why are institutions so decades far behind, right? When it comes to equity, institutions should be leading that charge, and they're not. They're obviously, in the States, it's a little different with, state-run and private. So that's a little bit different that I can't speak to. But again, it comes back to that system of higher ed is more than just student success, right? There's so many other political pieces. And so when we think what needs to be reformed, the entire system needs to be broken down and rebuilt. And that's just never going to happen because there's just too much invested in that. And we talk about getting new leaders in and new perspectives, and it does affect change and it does help. But for someone who's been in student affairs for over 25 years, I haven't seen a lot of change, and it's struggling. And I see the voices and I hear younger generations coming up saying these things like, yes, and then hearing the same stories of being overworked and leaving. The pandemic really just highlighted that. It didn't create these problems. It just said, hey, look at this. Now that we take away our physical spaces, all of a sudden our outcomes change. That was another big piece that the pandemic really highlighted, is how much Campus Rec was valued as a space rather than an actual student experience. Because we know we could have done a lot of the outcomes of student connection, health and well-being virtually through other pieces that didn't, stay with a facility. Yet what happened is furloughs and layoffs and shutdowns. And it's like, well, if you truly valued these things, then you would have supported and resourced those things, because the student well-being, if anything, was more important during that time, yet we cut more resources. So that disconnect is until institutions really reform their ideas of driving their values into their actions, we're going to continually have these problems. So
I want to add on to that with Mark. You hit the nail on the head with that last bit of what I was going to say, but I also want to say it's not just focusing on the students in that part. It's focusing on your full-time staff, your graduate assistants, those that are helping run your programs and managing your facilities. Like, yes, the first priority should be towards your students and having that, but you can't forget about the ones that are in the background making this stuff happen. We all have long stretches. We all understand that, but at the same time, your mission, vision, values, all of that, if it's the same for the students, it needs to match with what you're preaching and giving to your full-time, your GAs as well too. I think that's where a lot of the burnout comes from, as you've heard from all of us on this, of we've all been in spots overworked, and you've got the health and wellness stuff. As Sarah said, we were the worst offenders of it all.
Yeah, I mean, the whole what's wrong with higher ed could be a whole separate topic. But I know that's the big, to Ethan's point, of kind of some of that like academy, everyone else divide is like hard, of like, hey, I do a lot, and honestly sometimes I do more than like faculty and that kind of stuff think, of like getting the students where they need to go. And so seeing that disconnect is sometimes really hard, especially being on the staff side of things, of like, whoa, I mean, I know you engage with the students in the classroom, but you're not engaging with them in the way I see them, and there is a huge disconnect there. So
I'm kind of glad all of y'all live so far away, because I would immediately tell y'all to come over and let's just talk for hours and hours. So thank you for living far away from me. This is such an interesting question, because I put in my notes all of it, LOL. And so, Mark, I echo a lot what you said. And something that I've been really grateful to have an experience in this form of teaching now, right? Like, I've been a teacher in a lot of ways with Campus Rec, but now that being my position. And I think for me, where I can see it almost just impacting the student life in general is what we have already talked about, and then how we're measuring education and how we measure success. That looks so different for so many different people, but we have, and academics have found, okay, it's this way. You earn a degree, you do well on your tests, and you maybe go get a PhD, or, like, we're measuring it in that way. And what I've done with my class that I'm teaching this semester is they helped me create the syllabus in the way of, cool, I know y'all take exams. What are some other ways that can help us measure your education in this class with the material that you're given? Because I think what's challenging with being in recreational sports is our students are stressed. They're, alone, they're isolated. And then we're expected to figure it out, right? Or provide programming for them to be engaged and find a community. But I think a lot of the challenges also are with the academics piece, right? The stresses of them performing the best and getting the best grades and what that means for them to get to that point. It's almost like we're inheriting, okay, come here, like, we'll take care of you, but we're not addressing the root problem. So being at different institutions and different conferences, even going from like the University of Michigan to Texas Tech, I love my Texas Tech Red Raiders, but we care a little bit about other things than academics in some ways. But yeah, that's just like a very small sidebar to this really huge tree of conversation. Is maybe like thinking how we are measuring success, and how can we challenge that?
Well, if I could add, so I went to University of Waterloo for a math degree, failed out pretty much, then went to switch to engineering, then did a 4-year general arts degree, taking everything, including calculus and children's lit and drama and psychology, got my 4-year degree and got out of there. Had this student experience of working in intramurals and residence life and that. I have no formal education in rec. I don't have a rec degree. I don't have a master's in that. I was a rec director, and I think successful, and I loved it. Yet I look at, the piece of, well, you need a master's degree to run intramurals. Our students were running intramurals, like undergrad students. Like they were doing the work. I just made sure it happened and it's safe and all that. That's why my piece was always about the student aspect, student leadership, developing them. And that model is not rampant. It's not something that's easily accepted. And so we keep putting these demands on this education piece, and it comes back to, what does success look like? Was it my marks in actuarial science? No, and how much growth I got through student affairs as a student in those different areas and that holistic, I'm dating myself. This is the early 90s, right? So why has that not changed, right? Like, because I see and hear from students even now what great work they've done. And most of the time, it's not because of their academics. And that's not saying academics isn't important. Of course it is. I ended up getting my master's in leadership when I was ready for that academic experience. And it totally changed my vision of academia, because I was ready for the learning. But this idea of pumping people through a system just to get a degree, just so you can be employed and pretend to prove that you have the skill set is not happening. So the outcome of higher education is not really achieving what they think they're achieving. Sometimes it does, but I would argue that most of the time it's just push people through and see what happens.
All right, I got to add one thing off that with the master's degree part, because the only reason I went to Tennessee and the degree I went was because they were the only ones that offered me a GA spot. They were the ones I could get in, I could get it covered and paid for. And I know numerous colleagues that had to take on extra loans to go get their master's degree. And we all know, hey, it's preferred for you to have a master's degree when you're applying, but we all know in the field you have to have that. And for you to go through the 2 years of experience was fantastic, but students do run intramurals now. Like, I know that's there. I've seen it done at U of M. Like, I was part of that. So that master's degree philosophy of having to have that needs to be rethought, because you've got people that take that on as we go forward. So I really wanted to make sure Mark brought that up. I wanted to hammer that home, because I don't use much from my master's degree in my current job. I use more of my experiences as a GA and an intern than I do for my master's degree.
Well, thank you, everybody, for those thoughts on this previous question. So our last question is, what is important to you in a work environment, both then and now? And we'll go back to Sibby on this one.
Yeah, I think what's always important to me in a work environment, but like in a life environment, is approaching everything with like curiosity. I always try to encourage that, asking questions instead of judgment or anything like that. So that's really important to me. Self-awareness, which we've all had kind of a crash course over the past 3 years, and I hope that continues. And then I think flexibility. So understanding, like, I don't subscribe to the, well, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. I'm like, nah, dude, so I think the flexibility piece, while we still are in this just a machine of work and what that looks like, the flexibility piece I think is really important, knowing that I exist outside of this career and I'm not going to waste time. So that's what I got.
I'll add on.
Did I get all of them? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, well done, Sibby. Good, well said. I think I learned, like, back then, like, I was kind of that same mentality of, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And Sibby's dead on. Like, get out of that mentality. Like, you've got to find your work-life balance. And so I didn't realize that when I first got to BGSU. And so now what I look for in a work environment was what matters to me is I do have a work family, but I also can easily cut and divide that out, where I've got my own life, my own personal space. And I've got a colleague of mine here we're really close, both in and out of work, but we have separate conversations. I still enjoy what I do and I love what I do, but it doesn't consume my life. I can go do other things and have a life with my wife and daughter and go enjoy some of these other things that I've wanted to do. So I value that work-life balance. That was a big thing for me when I left, and I lucky enough was able to find some of that.
I'll go next. I think one of the big ones for me is respect. Like, I want to be trusted to do that I'm going to do the job that you hired me for, and I want you to trust me that I know what I'm doing. And then that also goes on the flip side too, of I want to be able to trust my colleagues that, like, hey, if I give you something or I ask you for something, I know that you're going to get it to me and all that kind of stuff. And that I know has gone like a long ways of, like, I've had that, and even in rec, that's been a big part of like why a work environment is so much fun, is that, like, hey, we can all trust that we've got a big goal to do and we're each going to do our parts, and I don't have to micromanage people to get it done and that kind of thing. So I think that's one of the big things, is that respect piece of, we can have different opinions or thoughts or whatever, but if we can all come together and get the goal done, that I think makes life a lot easier, especially in the work sphere.
For me, it's all those pieces, but I call it it's values driven. So if respect is a value, then it's there. It's explain what this looks like in your workplace, how it is you see respect in action, how you see flexibility in action, autonomy, all work-life balance. It needs to be spelled out, and a shared understanding of what that values means in your organization. And then you can hold yourself accountable, you can hold each other accountable, and you can call out organizations. Well, you say this, like, again, it comes back to if wellness is so important to our students, why is it not to our staff? So we should be able to go, there's our value. We can see it in an institutional document, and yet you have burnout. And so there's a disconnect. They go, well, yes, but you got to understand budgets and, the policy. It's like, okay, so we're not aligning with our values. So in any organization you either choose to work with or you're a part of, that's what needs to happen, so that if you don't value something like that. So some if you think of a lawyer, They're about the grind. Like, I got to put in hours. I'm going to work 80 hours, but I get compensated. There's like a social contract there. They understand that the 80 hours they put in relates in, the Mercedes, right? Like, and there's no hidden piece. They're not complaining about it because they've agreed to that social contract of what that looks like. That's where campus rec and student affairs, that social contract has been broken massively. And until that gets fixed, you're going to have this challenge of the work environment that just doesn't align with those values that institutions say they have but don't behave with.
Well said, Mark.
Yes.
I don't want 80 hours in a Mercedes. I'm happy with 30 hours and a Prius.
I completely understandable. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming on the show today. Like we at RecTrap really appreciate y'all. I know that you all have. This is the reason why we asked you on. Like, you have this great experience that you have from both being in the field and where you're at now. So yes, again, I really appreciate you all. So until next time, have a great rest of your week. I'll see you all soon, and be well. Thank you, everybody.